What do you see in these tests that other people don't see from just the free version or on the surface?
So basically, Myers-Briggs, the personality framework, it really likes talking about people's natural preferences. It's trying to put words to people's cognition, not their behaviors, not traits that can change, but actually going like, what's the core of like, what are your favorite ways of looking at things and making decisions? The coolest thing about personality type stuff is it's sort of like a framework, a tool that can help you get to know yourself. And the more you know yourself, the better you can make choices in life, right? Choices about your relationships, what job you do, how you like to help others, what are your personality superpowers, right? As we're going in life, especially in our 20s and 30s, right? It's a big journey of basically just like trying to figure out who the heck we are. And we think we know ourselves, right? But then you like have a relationship or you have you have a job or you have a whatever. And you're like, oh, wow, I have a lot of blind spots that I don't know about. And so it sort of gives you a shortcut, like a sort of like a hack to be able to see these things about yourself more clearly, but then also leverage that, right? So like be able to highlight that more for other people or like be able to communicate and express that better and more quickly to other people. I think a lot of people, when they're first taking the test, right, it's like, oh, what letters are you? What letters are you? And like not realizing that some of these categories or like topics that the personality type stuff gets into, it's so much more than just like, do you like hanging out with people or not hanging out with people? Do you like organizing your desk or not organizing your desk? It actually gets to some really deep, interesting stuff. The way that it breaks things down is using these sort of like 8 preferences. So introversion versus extroversion, intuition versus sensing, thinking versus feeling, and then judging versus perceiving. And so introversion versus extroversion, it's all about do you get energy from interacting outside, engaging with the outside world, or are you actually someone that gets energy from focusing mostly on your internal world, or at least focusing first on your internal processing?
Which means just your feelings, your own thoughts?
It's just sort of like calibrating things more to a personal point of view, being a little bit more selective, narrowing things in a little bit. Those are things that are usually connected to all different types of introversion. So I like using like throttling. It's a little bit like, let me throttle the outside world, like to sort of calibrate it a little bit more to maybe my own reasons or my own experiences, my own perspectives. All of that takes time, right? To go like, wait, how am I seeing this? Or what do I think about this? And so that's where the introversion comes from.
It's a customized approach.
Yes. And then, yeah, extroversion can look like lots of different things. Engaging outside, it doesn't always need to show up as like talking with people or liking to hang out with people. Sometimes you can have an extrovert and they are actually a lot of times spending time alone. But if you actually go inside their head, they're always thinking about outside problems, trying and exploring things outside, engaging and interacting outside, but in like a bunch of different ways. The next dichotomy that Myers-Briggs likes talking about, it's intuition versus sensing. And this category is really cool because it's like all about how do you like looking at things? What type of information do you naturally like focusing on and trusting first? And so some personality types, they naturally like focusing first or trusting more concrete information first. It's stuff that's a little bit more connected to real experience or things that you can see and interact with more directly. So this is like, I'm in the moment. I'm like really observing this in reality now, or like, let's get some like specifics or facts or reference my past experience, right? Those are things that I actually live through and that happen. So sensing information is likes to focus on that stuff first. And then intuition is basically liking to focus first on information that's not concrete. So stuff like guesses, speculation, patterns, interpretation, bigger picture stuff. Those are things that you can't actually verify sometimes or like touch or like spell out or draw. But that information is also really useful. And I sort of like using the analogy of like binoculars, right? It's like you could have a whole bunch of people go on the same exact trip, same exact experiences and events, but like each person might be like magnifying different things with their binoculars. Like, what information are you like going like, this is important, or like, this was the best part, or like, this is what we need to focus on, right? So that's what intuition and sensing is all about.
Yeah, the way I always thought it was broken down was that intuitive is more forward thinking and looking at what's new, looking into the future, and whereas sensing is more looking at the past and what are the patterns that have already proven itself. So it's also kind of maybe even like being more conservative. Like, hey, what's the tradition saying? What have we always done? Versus, hey, let's look forward. How can we improve things? How can we innovate? And I've always found myself, even with my business or YouTube or whatever, always trying to figure out, okay, how can I make this different? How can I do this differently where I'm the first to do it?
Yeah, I think it's, sometimes sensing preference can look like that. I think it's with intuitive preferences, it's all about trying to focus first on the potential, right? So potential can sometimes be oriented towards the future, right? It's like, what if it could be this other thing? And ultimately, that's actually just a guess, right? It's just like seeing a pattern or a possibility. But yeah, with intuitives, you usually, when sometimes they're planning things out or trying to execute on something, it's really important for them to go, well, what's the big picture potential that I'm actually headed towards? And they want to get that information more like locked in first before getting into the details. Whereas with sensing preference, they can also be like change makers and really ambitious and do all this cool stuff. But for them, they're like, let's focus on the practical reality first, and then we can like start brainstorming different like possibilities.
Nice. So we got the first two letters out of the way. There's introverted versus extroverted. Then there's sensing versus intuitive. Talk to me about the third one, thinking versus feeling. Seems very self-explanatory, but is it?
Thinking versus feeling is tricky because, we all have emotions and we all can be like really intelligent and logical. This category, it actually has nothing to do with your intelligence or like ability to have emotions. It's actually more about like when you're making decisions and prioritizing things, are you someone that naturally likes to focus on problem solving or helping in a more detached way, or in a more like thinking about like factoring in feelings criteria, feelings metrics, stuff like values, relationships? How is this going to make like the feelings, the people, that sort of thing? Both types can be really into helping people. That's actually a common like misconception. Both types really care about people and really like helping people. But when you look at the ways that they're approaching it, you might have like thinkers that are like, oh, if I just sort of like analyze how people might feel and like the cause and effect of that, or like, why are you feeling like that? Let's analyze the reasons why you might be feeling like that. And if I solve the problem for you, if I give you a solution, then you'll feel better, right? It's a little bit like, let me tackle this in a more like unemotional way, and then you'll feel better. Whereas with the feeling personality types, it's like, no, feelings are a part of the problem. Feelings are something that you need to take care of and factor in when you're making the decisions.
Because we're human beings, right?
Right.
So
exactly.
Emotions always, they always throw a bit of a curveball sometimes, right? So
yeah.
And lastly, we talked about judging versus perceiving.
Yeah, judging versus perceiving is basically like, how much do you like organizing the outside world? So judging preference personality types, it's like, if I organize outside, inside I can have some peace because I know that things are like settled and decided, and like I have an idea of how things should be or how I expect things to be. And I want to put some effort into like maintaining that or like keeping that a certain way. And so for them, actually adding structure makes them feel better. On the other hand, you have perceiving preference types, and they actually get energy from getting rid of structure. It's a little bit like, if I just sort of know myself or have things organized in my own mind, then I don't need to have the outside so organized. I can just react to the different emerging information. Oh, something's changing. So a different option popped up. I know myself. That's what I want to do now. And so they're calibrating a little bit more to a personal point of view. And so what that means is when you calibrate more internally with organizing, they actually get energized by like going, oh, if I have less structure, I can be more spontaneous and I get more options to more fully experience things or explore the things that I want to, right? Let's not like, yeah, like decide on things or close those loops too early because like, what if that's not the right fit for me a little bit later?
So it sounds like judging is more from the outside in versus perceiving is more from the inside out.
Yeah, judging tends to be a little bit more like externally motivated, whereas perceiving tends to be a little bit more internally motivated with like how they like organizing things.
Interesting. I think that's why it becomes really important to when you're picking roommates,
Yes.
right? I would assume that they when you have a strong J and a strong P living together, there's going to be some conflict.
Yes, I've had my own like sort of experiences with that.
Nice. So, what are the big components that you look for?
A lot of websites, especially like 16personalities.com, the things that they're describing, it's actually behavior. When in reality, if you really get to know Myers-Briggs and this specific personality framework, what it's really trying to get into is actually your cognition. So it's not really your behavior, like are you someone that always likes your bed made or always likes a to-do list? It's actually going like, how do you like looking at things? What type of information do you naturally prioritize or focus on first? When you're making a decision, how are you judging that decision? What are you prioritizing in that decision? And so it really gets into some wiring stuff actually that's very like deep and unique to you. And so that's actually probably one of the number one things that I like looking for in either the website or the framework is like, is this describing a behavior, a trait, which is something that can change, right? Or is it talking more about your cognition, which is something that actually, in my opinion, doesn't really change the way that people think.
So, what are some of the examples of cognitive functions and how they play out in real life so people can look at, okay, what could be mine?
Okay. So for instance, with the logical decision making, you could have someone that really is like the logical decisions that they like making, they're very focused on outside. So it's like, what's the goal? How are we going to get that done? What resources are necessary in order to make that happen? Let's reverse engineer. Let's do resource management and systems thinking to think about what's the most logical way to get things done and make things work outside. But then on the other hand, you could have someone else who's actually the type of logical checking in that they do. It's actually more about like checking in with themselves and trying to understand things for themselves and going, what actually makes sense to me? Maybe this is why other people are doing it, but what are my personal reasons for doing things? And I'm going to personalize it a little bit to myself. So that person, they might not be like so goal and results oriented, right? They might not be measuring things in that way, but then they might have their own version of sort of like thinking things through and checking things in a logical way. And the thing that I think is really interesting is because on social media, there is so much, everyone's just sharing their advice about how you should do things or what's going on or what's the best way to whatever. And from a personality perspective, I always think that's really interesting because everyone's often sharing their personality type advice from their own perspective, right? It's like, that's the personality advice that like works best for them or that is super useful for them or is like something that they're working on because of their personality type. But is that always actually the best advice for you?
I love that. It's very important who you take advice from and can that be applicable to you and who you are. So I want to put a pin in that. Are there any other cognitive functions or ways where that applies other than just decision making?
Yeah, it's also the ways that people like making connections. Some people, the types of connections that they make, it's sort of like liking to see how things are connected outside and going, oh, this can be connected to this, and this is making me think of this. And it's a very like connecting outside things and getting a lot of inspiration from outside. Like when these personality types interact outside, there are like interesting questions or ideas start popping into their head naturally. But then on the other hand, you could have some other personality types where the type of connecting that they do, it's actually a lot more internal. It's not always getting it from outside. It's like, let me actually go inside my mind and sort of let the patterns form. That type of way of making connections, it's so interesting because it impacts how people tell stories, how like the type of content that people make, the ways that people communicate, what people find meaningful is actually different depending on these different personality types.
Another one I wonder about is also how we organize things, whether it's internally or, yeah, but that probably then also shows up externally, right?
Yeah. I mean, what are some of the ways that you've seen this pop up for yourself?
I like to close loops. I like to get things done sooner rather than later. Like, for example, living with housemates is very revealing that we have different personalities and we like to handle things differently. And so when I cook, before I eat, I do the dishes. I just get that out of the way. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to have that floating in the back of my mind. But I know other people are different, right? And so that's, again, an external way that shows up. But I think in an internal way too, I like to have things organized and not rely on my memory for it to float around. I want it somewhere where I can hold on to it and grab it, whether it's setting a reminder that I know is going to remind me or something visual that I know is going to bug me until I get it done.
Yeah, I mean, that you just perfectly described one of the main categories that the Myers-Briggs personality framework likes talking about, which is sort of like the judging versus perceiving. A lot of people think of it as like your one type likes organizing things and one type likes just like being spontaneous. But really, when you get to the core of it, it's a lot more of like what you said. It's like sort of like I have an idea of how things should be done, or I have all these responsibilities sometimes on my plate. And my mind can rest when the loops are closed. Like you said, things are more decided and settled, because like if I have an idea of how things are supposed to be, adding some structure is going to help with making that thing happen. Whereas with the perceiving preferences, they actually tend to like getting rid of structure.
Mm-hmm. And what about the social aspect? I'm assuming that's also a big chunk of cognitive functions. It's how we relate to others.
It pops up a lot in terms of, again, like what we find meaningful, what types of ways that we like to explore and interact, right? Like an example that comes to mind is like, for me, quality time is like hanging out with someone and we could be doing nothing, but just like talking and sharing interesting ideas. And I sometimes say like, it doesn't matter if I'm like on a couch having an interesting conversation next to a dumpster, or like if I was in Hawaii, the experience for me would be pretty much the same. Like probably if you measured my brain, I would just be getting the same level of enjoyment out of it. And so talking is like a really big part of how I like to connect. But then like sometimes we've talked with other personality types and they're like, their idea of quality time is just like being together. Like sometimes it's just like doing an activity or an experience. They're like, actually don't do so much talking. I just want to be like walking with you and having a great experience together, but no talking. For me, that would be really horrible, right? Or I would be a little bit like, how is this quality time? But for them, they're like, why does there need to be so much talking, right? So I think that, yeah, like the things that we find engaging and meaningful is often connected to personality type stuff.
Mm-hmm. So you dive into the Myers-Briggs, right? And so for those people who don't know, there's 4 letters on the surface that you get, which is E or I, then N versus S, then T versus F, and then either you get J or P.
Yeah.
So what's underneath all that? Are the cognitive functions, is each one of these letters is one or the other cognitive function? Are there multiple cognitive functions? How do they connect?
Basically the N and S category and the T and F category, those get expanded. So for instance, instead of just intuition, you could have introverted intuition and extroverted intuition. With thinking and feeling, you could have introverted thinking and extroverted thinking. And so like at the end, it breaks down to like 8 different cognitive functions. And then depending on which ones are really natural and comfortable for you versus which ones are a little bit more clumsy and awkward, the cognitive functions are like building blocks, and it sort of gets put together into almost like a decoder ring for your personality type. The thing that in practical terms, what it really likes getting into is some of the nuance that just the four letters can't get into. So for instance, let's say you were in ESTJ. So extroverted, sensing, thinking, and judging. On the surface, ESTJ is super useful, but going a little deeper, the cognitive functions can help an ESTJ get to know what is your introverted side like? What is your intuitive side like? What is your feeling side like? And what ways do you like being more spontaneous? So it sort of talks about like, if you ever feel like your four letters don't fully represent you, or like there's something missing, or like sometimes I feel like I do like, blank, the cognitive functions are where some of that like extra nuance comes from.
What are some other behaviors or what are some other ways that people can figure out their personality just listening to this without taking the tests, that just give them signs where, hey, if you like doing this, then you may be more on this side, right? So you mentioned a few things like, okay, do you like to connect ideas, or do you naturally do that? Or do you like spending time with people by talking, or just being in silence, doing an activity? What are some other maybe small, interesting ways where that give away something about themselves that they can then apply?
I mean, I think with even just introversion versus extroversion, right? The main way that people see introversion and extroversion, it's all about social introversion and extroversion, when in reality, it's actually not about that at all. It's actually talking about, are you someone that naturally gets a lot of energy from interacting outside with the outside world? Or are you someone that gets a lot of energy from actually focusing more on your internal world? And so what people don't realize is that extroversion can look like so many different things that's not actually related to talking with people or socializing. Like if you're someone that's like solving problems outside or thinking about problems outside a lot, or wanting to try and interact with things or explore things outside, or like that actually can still sometimes be an extroverted preference. Or on the other hand, you could have an introvert and they still like people. They still like, they could be really confident or really charismatic, because it doesn't have anything to do with that. But when you look at their preferences, sometimes they're liking to sort of like throttle or like slow down things from the outside world. It's a little bit like, let me have a little extra time to have some space from interacting outside so I can concentrate or reflect, go inward a little bit more to process things internally. And so, I think like when people flesh out their understanding of what those two categories are, and realizing it actually doesn't have anything to do with your popularity or social confidence or any of that stuff, it's actually really interesting to go, oh, that might be why. Like I can sort of like give myself some permission to accept myself or understand some of those differences.
So going back to the who you should take advice from, I always had an intuitive sense that there are some people that I just shouldn't listen to because they think differently, they operate differently, they have a different personality, they have just a different DNA, right? So a friend of mine was saying yesterday that he once hired this guy who he was like a confidence type of coach or whatever, and he hired him because that guy just didn't care at all. And my friend really did care a lot, and he was really hesitant to approach people, and he always thought about what other people think, right? Whereas that coach, he was actually kind of a narcissist. He just didn't care at all, right? And so he was like, I want to learn from that guy. Now, I think that could be one approach that seems logical, is, okay, you hire someone who's completely different from you, and you see what pieces can you take from them. But what I was wondering was, what if he actually hired someone who thought like him and had very similar DNA and figured out a way to deal with that? Wouldn't that be a much better approach? Because there's so many ways that these guys are then connected, right? Like I would personally rather learn from someone who has had the same past as me, this very similar personality, but has overcome a challenge that I want to overcome, than someone who never struggled with certain things that I had, or, had different struggles. So what do you think?
No, I think you're spot on. I mean, I think that sometimes we can like trick or force ourselves into like getting a result from like these like very counterintuitive ways. But usually the best way is for you to actually get to know yourself, get to know what ways do you like processing things or making decisions. And then from that, you'll understand a little bit more of your blind spots or stress points or areas that you can work on. And then I think it usually works best to find the solution, but in your own way. Like, what's your instead of just like hiring a dating expert or whatever, like think about like what ways do you like to connect, or what types of interactions do you find meaningful, and then like what barriers are stopping you from that because of your personality, and then how can you get around that. So basically exactly what you said. Like, I mean, it just makes sense, right? It's like the more like personalized or individualized the solution, right, it's usually going to work better for you. So
Yeah, and I think at least when I know my personality and how I like to process things and my cognitive functions, then at least I know how to filter the information and personalize it to myself. So if I hear some entrepreneur that I look up to talk about something and just say, "Hey, you just need to stop planning so much and just go," and
yeah.
just and just talk to people and network, and I'm like, "Oh, that's not what I like to do." I can at least filter the information and take what's useful, leave what's not.
Yeah, I think you actually talked about that in one of your videos, where you were saying like how you got all this advice about how to like execute and plan and optimize all this stuff, and then you realize like, wait, maybe I need to actually like practice ways to like loosen up a little bit, or like to leave things a little bit more open, right? I think you actually even said it. Like sometimes we think we're like doing the hard thing, but we're actually just like doing what we already like, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I think this is where we get into an interesting discussion about strengths versus weaknesses and which one do you focus on. So I think the post that you're referring to that I made was actually a newsletter. So for anyone who's listening, check that out. And I was basically telling the story of how my roommates and I were meeting once a week to just share what we have going on and where we can maybe help each other. And it's funny to see how we're all giving different advice, and they all happen to be the same personality type,
okay.
which is the campaigner, right? And I am, yeah, I'm curious to have you read me later on, but I'm a different one. And so the advice that they're giving, they're all agreeing, and they're like, you just gotta like, just see what's right and feel it out, and just and just like go with the flow. And meanwhile, I'm like, you need to push through, like just go get stuff done, and so. And we naturally tend to gravitate towards what's comfortable for us versus let me go a different route. Like for me, that would just be like, let me just post twice a week now. I don't know if it's perfectly planned out. I like to prepare more, but this way I don't have much time to prepare and it's uncomfortable. And I see a lot of growth from that. So how do you know what to focus on? Should you focus on your strengths, or when should you focus on your weaknesses?
The more you learn about your personality type, your strengths and your weaknesses are usually connected, right? It's like because you're so good at this, that means that the opposite way of looking at things or doing things feels uncomfortable for you. So actually the what my colleague and I teach, it's like actually more about like finding more balance or like integration with your personality type. It's like instead of just like over relying on these things, which can create some stress points or like one-sidedness, how can you integrate some of the other sides of your personality type to become a little bit more balanced? And so it's like, is that working on your weaknesses or is that working on your strengths? It's hard to say, right? It's just sort of like, it's a little bit different. But ultimately, it's about being a little bit more precise about what are the ways I could like balance myself out, or like not be just like over relying on this thing that I'm really comfortable with. So for you, right, executing, pushing through, like, what's the goal? Like, let's step aside from the feelings to get this done. Like, that's more natural for you.
Mm-hmm. I guess it's mostly about adaptability and flexibility, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes what you're naturally doing, ideally you're in a career where that's the default, right? Where that gets rewarded. If you love having things in order, hopefully you're an accountant, right? And so then leaning into those, but in moments where that's not needed, then being able to lean into the other bucket or on the other side of the spectrum.
Exactly. Like if you are like all comfortable with just thinking decisions, how can you integrate more feelings, right? If you are like really liking to trust your concrete experience, what are some ways you can like be a little more comfortable like exploring some unknowns or possibilities, right?
How much can be changed? Like how, like, okay, somebody gets a personality test. I think a lot of people, they do it and they don't like it. Like, oh no, I'm not the one that Albert Einstein is, damn it.
Yeah.
Or they read some of their weaknesses and they're like, oh, this sucks. How much can be changed? How much? What have you seen? Do you have any specific examples of people that you've seen change a lot?
So there's two sides of it, right? One is getting the accurate type result, and one is like growing as a person, right? So in terms of like taking the test, it's actually very common for people to not get their actual personality type result at first. It's usually they're like 1 to 2 letters off usually. And that's just a flaw with the test, or the questions can be misinterpreted and stuff. So on that side of things, like from that perspective, your personality type can change lots of times because you might be like learning more about yourself and like getting more accurate results. In terms of like when you land on your actual best fit personality type though, I actually don't think that changes dramatically. Now, some people, they like freak out about that. They're like, no, I need to change, every personality type is awesome. Every personality type is amazing and can do all, like, has like unlimited potential, right? So instead of trying to change your personality type, it's actually more about like, how can you become the best version of your personality type? And I don't know, sometimes I use the analogy of like playing an instrument or something, right? It's like you got the 6 strings of a guitar. The 6 strings of the guitar always stay the same, usually. But like how you play that instrument might change dramatically in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, right? And so instead of like freaking out about like, what, I want these strings to be like totally different strings. It's like, no, it's like, let's appreciate the fact that you're a guitar. But like, how can you like find ways to like play different types of music, or like become more expressive, or like, improve or whatever with your core like wiring and preferences. So yeah, like I don't think your core, when you really land on your best fit type, a lot of your natural preferences don't really change that much. But like how those preferences can express themselves can change drastically based on your experience, your values, like mental health, like how much you work on yourself, all that sort of stuff.
That's one of the things I talked about in the recent podcast about finding your path in life, your passion, and something that you're excited about. And I think it's common for people to dislike their results or to want to change them. And what I said there too was, you can work really hard at becoming something else, but then you're going to become really mediocre at it, rather than just focusing on how you already like to naturally do things, and then you're going to become exceptional at it.
Yeah, totally. Honestly, if you really like learn about each personality type in depth, every personality type is so awesome. Like, it's really unfortunate the stereotypes that people have, like this personality type's mean, or this personality type's boring, or this, none of those are true really when you really get to know it. And so like, I promise you, whatever personality type result you are, like when you really land on it, it's really awesome. There's some amazing like gifts that personality type brings to the world, or like superpowers. It's just like, it might not be represented so well online.
So what's your personality type? And what have you seen is mine?
I'm an INTP personality type.
Oh, dude, that one sucks.
Yeah.
How are you going to change that, man?
Honestly, in some ways, yeah. Like, in some ways, yeah. Every personality type is amazing and annoying at the same time. But yeah, no, like some of the things that my personality type pretty naturally does is like I do my own, like I'm very into sort of like doing my own thing for my own reasons. So I really like thinking things through for myself and going like, what actually makes sense to me? Other people might be really caring about this, or really like thinking this is important, or like having a little bit of emotional bias with their decisions. I really want to like filter that and question that, and do what actually makes sense to me. And so my strength is sort of like sometimes being like sort of like honest and like analyzing things to figure out like what's the right fit for me, or for like other people. For you, I mean, are you comfortable like diving into
Yeah, absolutely.
From talking with you in real life, and also seeing your videos and lots of different things, I mean, I think the personality type fit that makes the most sense is the ENTJ personality type. And so what ENTJs tend to be really good at is having a little bit of that, like, what's the goal? What's the mission? Okay, now how can we execute on this? Like, what's necessary in order to make things work and get things done? And like, I have sort of like a guess, an intuition. I have an idea of where I think things should go. And I've really like built this guess, a very specific guess about where I want things to go in my head. And now I want to sort of like really execute on things and like, how can we progress with this? How can we get results? Like for your personality type, usually like making things progress or like some sort of resource managing is like very satisfying.
Music to my ears. I think it's spot on. I remember testing earlier in a video 3 years ago about finding a passion, and I tested as ENFJ.
Yeah.
And that sounded very accurate too. But ENTJ, yeah, it seems more accurate. So
I think we talked about this at Vid Summit, right? I was like, I think you might want to look at ENTJ. But the thing is it's actually really common though for an ENTJ to get an ENFJ result, because the stereotypes, right, are that like feelers are nice and care about people, and thinkers just like want to get results. But in reality, if you really get to know ENTJs, they love helping people. They actually really care about people, but the ways that they like helping are going to be a little bit different from an ENFJ.
Yes, tell him, Eric. Tell him that I care about people. Seriously, because some people are like, "Oh yeah, this is you." Yeah, these are like people who don't care about people. It's like, oh, that doesn't resonate with me at all.
No.
But I think it can be. People can experience me as impatient, or when not handled well, it can be seen as cold, right? Because sometimes I just like everyone's like peddling someone or just like enabling them to continue this pattern, and just like, no, it's fine. And I'm like, yo, this is not fine. You're messing up like your life, and like I gotta because I care about you. I gotta tell you how it is, and so.
Yeah, sometimes with thinking types, they're like, the way I will help you is by being really honest, and like it'll hurt a little bit, but like ultimately it'll help you. It might help you like solve your problem better that you were stuck on. And so sometimes this is, we need to just take the emotion out of this to like measure this a little bit objectively, and that can sort of hurt, but like it'll help you, I promise. And so like usually with thinkers, the growth area is just going like, I know you care about people, I know you want to help people, but like just integrate a little bit more feeling into it, and it'll work great.
It's funny because that's exactly what I was gonna say now. Having done a leadership program the last few months and like just working on myself, focusing on different areas of my life, the biggest thing that I've learned now is to just be with someone. And when they complain about their problems, I'm just like, oh, that sucks. And I really just feel it. And I don't go into advice mode at all. I'm just like, until they ask me. And then friends of mine have told me like, you've really changed. And I'm like, yeah, it's really just that. It's just like accepting everyone exactly for who they are and celebrating them. And when they have problems, by the way, that helps a lot with dating. Like for me, with the other sex. I mean, that has been a challenge in the past, that I always wanted to support them and always, let's solve this problem. It's like, no, just be with them.
And it's sort of hard though, right? It's sort of uncomfortable, or it feels like you're not helping.
It can be, especially when like you have the magic pill that they could just take this and it'll go away. but you're just like you just keep it in your pocket and you're like, oh, that really sucks. That really sucks, doesn't it? That really. Tell me more about that. It's hurting you, and how that makes you feel.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, like I also have like a thinking preference really high. And so I run into those situations all the time. But yeah, like for me, the growth is like remembering that feelings are a part of the solution. And so actually what I've heard from a lot of feelers is like it's not like they're illogical. They or that they don't like solutions. But sometimes maybe in the moment they might not be there's a feeling that needs to be solved first. And then once the feeling is solved by support or understanding or whatever, then there's space for the solution or whatever, like analyzing it. But in the moment, like sometimes when you're skipping over the feelings, it feels very like upsetting. It's like, oh, so you don't care about, this thing. So just, yeah, for it can really feel like I'm doing nothing. I'm just listening, right? But
Yeah.
sometimes that's like exactly the best thing to do.
Oh, absolutely. And I've learned to love it. I've learned to love to just hold space for people and just be like, okay, tell me more. And just really
Yeah.
be in the feeling with them. And I think I'm actually very balanced on the feeling portion because even for myself, I cannot do something if I'm not juiced up by it. I just can't. It's just like
Yeah.
pushing through emotions is actually it's actually difficult for me. And I think that's one of the gifts that I have is that I have a low pain tolerance. So when something's not working or something I don't enjoy something, I can't really get behind it for too long.
Yeah. That's actually another side of your personality. So, yeah.
So what are some ways that people can apply this into their real life? Like one of the things that comes up is dating, right?
Yeah.
I think just knowing, not necessarily looking for someone specific. Like I think you mentioned this before we started recording, not looking for someone specifically based on their personality type, but just getting to know your significant other, getting to know your roommates, your family, your friends, and then knowing what their internal map of the world is and how
Yeah.
they, right?
Yeah. Honestly, like just understanding the letters, the basic dichotomies, the ABCs of it, without getting into functions, it's already super powerful. Like just knowing some of these core differences, introversion versus extroversion, thinking versus feeling. I would just recommend people like just falling in love with those and then like get seeing more real examples of it in real life, and it will really help you with like all sorts of communication and relationships. And then from there it's not actually just about like putting people into a box or stereotyping them. It's actually about yeah, finding ways to appreciate or understand where different people are coming from. Like, not everyone thinks like you, dude. Like, not everyone likes doing things exactly the same way as you. And so, instead of like a lot of times, like in a relationship, right? You think what you're doing is helping, but it's actually like not for the other person. And so, yeah, it's like a good way to figure out how to take care of other people. And from like when you're trying to grow or work on yourself, a lot of times it's by working on like sort of your opposite. So for instance, like if you're extroverted, like how can you get a little bit better with introversion, right? If you're intuitive, how can you get better with sensing? If you're thinking, how can you get better with feeling? And then so that's like sort of a very easy map to be able to go, I might be actually not as good at the feeling thing as I thought. Like how can I like put some effort into that? And that's going to help you as a person. So yeah, just like figure out what your personality type is and then sort of figure out what the opposite is, which is usually like the things that will balance you out. And then that's like a great starting point for everyone.
I think the big question in my mind and maybe also the people's mind is, what about the whole focusing on your strengths thing? And the way I categorize that in my mind is that yes, you want to in your career and in your life, you want to optimize, you want to find a lane where your strengths can shine. And at the same time, sometimes the weakest link is what can destroy your results in life, in relationships, right? And so balancing those out will release some bottlenecks, right? And so
Yeah. Well, I'm curious for you. I mean, the people that you've really connected with, this could be romantically or even just in friends. Do they tend to be your favorite people in your life or the people that are life-giving to you? Do you tend to find them that they're really similar to you, like exactly the same as you or opposite?
I know that I really resonate with people who are the same, like even just like online, people like
Yeah.
content that I consume. I'm like, this guy gets it. Like, yes, I like the way he thinks. It's highly applicable. That's why I'm a big fan of Tony Robbins and how he approaches things. He's also
Yeah.
ENTJ, and I'm like, it just makes sense the way he does it. And to me, it's like, it's perfect, right? It's like, in my life, I don't have a lot of ENTJs around me. I think I have a lot of ENTPs. Yeah, those just happen to be entrepreneurial as well, right? And so
Interesting.
I know that my ENTP friends, they're all about marketing. They're all about, okay, selling and marketing and promoting, right? The personality type is called the campaigner, right? Whereas I find myself focusing on the product more. Let me just make that thing so good, and then marketing is going to get easy.
Interesting. Yeah. I think again the core of a successful relationship, whether it's relationship or friendship, it all again goes back to like how well do you know yourself and like what's important to you? What are your values, right? Any personality type combination can actually be really special, but it does like the make or break is like how well have you worked on yourself? How well do you know yourself? How well do you what are your values? And so I think like again, like personality type doesn't solve everything, but it is like a good starter pack tool kit to be able to go like for instance, introversion versus extroversion. Do you want to be like the same in that category or different? Because each one is going to bring a little bit different. You get two introverts together, they're going to be very internal, and that's going to be really special in some ways, but really annoying in some ways. You get two extroverts together, really fun, but sometimes maybe like a little bit one-sided as well. And then sometimes you're okay, then we're opting for an introvert and an extrovert. Well, that's also going to cause some problems or like have some challenges because you're different, right? So it's like knowing what helps you, right? What is the best version of yourself? And like usually that takes like experience and like talking to more people and getting to know yourself to like know like and that's just again, that's just one letter. Introvert versus extrovert. Imagine like if you like do that for all of them. You're already like have plenty of material to like start gauging, oh, I actually do like things this way or like this is what I prefer.
The way I look at it is learning different languages as well. Because
Yeah.
if I don't know how I like to process things and then transfer them to you,
Yes.
because I don't know how you like to process things or what you care about and how you like to approach things, then I can't really communicate things well to you, or it's a hit or miss,
Yeah.
right? It's like sometimes things resonate and sometimes it's like, I don't know about that one.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's because it's a crucial skill for leadership is being able to, I at least I like to adjust my approach to the person that I'm speaking to because I think it just makes me more effective. And that's what I care about
Yeah.
because I'm ENTJ. So
How can you speak more effectively? How can you communicate more effectively? How can you take care of someone more effectively by speaking their language? Right. That's the power of like learning about personality differences. And yeah, I like love the topic so much. I love nerding out about it so much.
what do you say to people who say, hey, this personality stuff, that's
Yeah.
not scientific, that's not
Yeah.
legit, it's BS.
Yeah, that's a really good topic. I think with most, I haven't really seen someone that has really dived in and really understands the material and what it's about who has that opinion. Usually the case is I like any tool in the wrong hands is either dangerous or can hurt people or can be like sort of like not bring the best results. But usually the things that people are frustrated about are it's usually because people are misunderstanding the tool and what it's about or like misusing it. So sometimes they're like, I'm only going to hire these personality types, or I'm, I'm going to fire this person because they're this person. And, that's obviously like that's not very ethical. That's not ethical. That's not what the framework is even for. The core of Myers-Briggs is like, it's not a tool for limiting or stereotyping people. It's actually for learning about yourself and learning how to like work better together with other people. So yeah, the two things that people sometimes like, the other core thing about Myers-Briggs is it's trying to talk about your natural preferences, right? So like, what's your favorite way of looking at things and making decisions? That's it. That's what it is. Like, let's not try to take things beyond that scope. Usually the challenges that people have are either people using it to stereotype or limit people, or they don't trust the results. And usually it's because they're either thinking that the test is talking about behavior, not cognition, or they don't understand what the letters are about, and so they have gotten the wrong result by accident. And so they're like, this isn't me. And it's like, yeah, that's true. That isn't you.
I feel like it's a bit of a catch-22 sometimes as well, because if you take the test and you don't know yourself really well,
Yeah.
then you end up giving the wrong answers that are not accurate, but it's just what society's told you, what, other people have told you. And
100%.
like if I went to Germany, I am way more fluid than everyone there, right? And so I would then take the test and be like, oh, I'm actually really like, I love breaking rules. I love, Now when I'm in South America, then I'm like, I'm like, okay, I love structure. I'm like so much more structure than everyone here, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I think it trips people up. One thing I've also found is that when somebody doesn't like this stuff and they kind of, have some problems with it, I'm like, are you an ENTP? Are you a debater? Because the ENTP is the debater, right? And so I'm like, okay, yeah, of course you don't like being put into a box. I understand, So
yeah,
that's something I've also seen, right?
Yeah, sometimes there's certain personality types that are like naturally more curious about it and more drawn to it, and then others where it takes a little bit more convincing, or they need to see it a little bit more in real life. I think again, like, it's unfortunate because it's such a powerful tool, but there's so many, like, if people really just understood and got to know what the categories are, like, what is introversion versus extroversion and what isn't it? Like, a lot of people don't have on the blogs or the whatever, you don't get that like more in-depth information about like actually what the letters are talking about but when people really experience what the letters are actually talking about, usually they don't have the problems or complaints that they had before.
The way I see it is just a useful tool.
Yeah,
like it's just a useful tool. Are there any other big challenges that you see between specific personality types or cognitive functions? So we talked about thinking versus feeling, right? That was, I think, is a really great example where people can look at their own life and be like, oh, I'm this one side, and this other person that sometimes I have problems with in conflict.
Yeah.
They're this other type. And okay, now I can understand it. Are there any other big ones?
Thinking and feeling's a big one. I mean, literally every single one is a big one. I mean, like, you got judging versus perceiving. Someone's like, oh, I'll help. Like, the best vacation is when it's like super planned out. And then the other person's like, please, no, that's horrible. And then intuition versus sensing. Sometimes that's like that's really hard, because like what you're finding interesting and meaningful might be super like boring or uninteresting to the other person, right? And so like, how can you bridge that gap to go, oh, I'm intuitive and I totally forgot to say be specific about or clear about what I was actually talking about. I forgot to give examples. I forgot to like make it concrete. I was just sort of like in abstract la la land with no examples. And then on the other hand, it's like with the sensing preference type, sometimes it's like, oh, I thought I was helping by giving you all the details and specifics, right? You're telling me if I had just given you like the big picture of like why we're doing this or like what it's all about, then you could have heard all the details, but actually you just like skipped over all of that and like jumped over that because that's like not the information that you're naturally focusing on. And so It's super helpful. And yeah, intuition versus sensing is like a huge one. It's like, how can you be more clear to the other person?
How can people take the test and get the most accurate results?
I've spent like years trying to find like the perfect test or the perfect whatever, and there are some really good ones out there, but I think they all have their flaws. And the flaws are just because you can't optimize a test for people's blind spots. Like everyone will interpret whatever question into whatever. And some personality types will naturally have some difficulties with some of the questions, or like knowing themselves, right? So the not fun answer is that all the tests will probably have some downsides or challenges. And
Ooh.
the reality is like the best thing to find your best fit type is to spend time getting to know the framework, what it means, then testing it in reality, like getting to know people, talking with people, going like seeing what an intuitive and a sensing preference actually looks like, and like testing it out in real life. And then when you get to know the framework more, you can choose for yourself a lot more accurately what your best fit personality type is. The problem is a lot of people just approximate what each of the categories is talking about. It's like, I like interesting conversations. I'm an intuitive, I like people. I like taking care of people. I'm a feeler, right? So it's when in reality, the categories are like so much more than that.
So no tests, just learning the framework, going about your life and seeing how you already naturally approach things. I mean, that's what any test is trying to simulate anyway, right? It's just asking you a question. How do you like to do this? And then basically just taking the test for yourself throughout your life.
The sometimes one of the things that I offer as a service is like for some people who want to go really in depth, my colleague and I, we do something called a profiling session. And so through conversation, we'll talk with someone for like 2 hours and like really like get to know them, ask them about themselves, ask them about their background, and like give them little scenarios and stuff, and then see what preferences keep popping up more consistently over time. So obviously that's going to help get more accurate results.
And for someone who's just curious and wants to get a quick read, what would be the best test to take online?
Honestly, 16personalities.com. Chances are high you will not quite get the right result, but at least it'll point you in the right direction. That's what I like to say.
As long as people know that, right?
Yeah, if you know going in that it might be like 1 or 2 letters off, at least it'll point you in the right direction and it'll give you sort of like a good starting point.
Any other thing that you want to point people to?
I have 2 channels, but the main one that people can find me on, it's Eric Wen. I like teaching people about their personality patterns and how they can use personality types to like get better results in their relationships and communication, all that sort of stuff. And then for people who want to dig into some of the cognitive function stuff, I nerd out a little bit more on a second channel, and that's called Think More Deeply.
Awesome. I'll go ahead and link those below, as well as your channel. And yeah, this was great. Thank you so much.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.